Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion. Second hour is tips and all kinds of things that we want to talk about as specialties. Today, we're going to do a little tips and tricks with Keynote. And this is going to be more of a free-form thing. So we're going to see what people have questions about. So if you have questions about Keynote, put them in now. Because it's not really a presentation as much as it is just people, let's figure this stuff out together in that second hour. Third hour today, of course, is with the educators. And so they'll come in at 9 and we'll talk about education. That's not on YouTube. So you have to be in Zoom for that. All right, let's jump into the questions. Mitch, what do we have?
Thank you, Alex. First question coming in from Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida. Hybrid event audio of Zoom presenters. You mentioned an X32 yesterday. Could you please cover the setup configuration in more detail? Thanks.
Yeah. So the main thing is that you have everything coming in. So you're going to take your Zoom outputs and have them go obviously into the X32. And that can be done in a couple different ways. So the X32, you could do it analog out. So in the old days, we would use a USB Pre2 from sound devices to get the audio out. It's just it's probably the best way to get, in my opinion, it's the simplest and best way to get balanced audio out of a computer. It just plugs into any computer. There's no software required. There's no drivers. It just shows up. It's got dip switches on the back. It's just very hard to screw up. So we would use a USB Pre2 and have it go out of there into into your X32. The other way that you can do that, of course, is using something like Dante Virtual Sound Card. So that now you can just send Dante out if you get a Dante card for the X32. So that's how you're going to get your Zoom in. Now, if you have multiple speakers, you may want to create multiple Zoom rooms so that each one of them is in their own audio pipeline. And that becomes a little bit more complicated, but it's something that you can do. But that's something that you should think about. If you have 3 or 4 speakers, by putting them in their own rooms, in their own breakout rooms, and then having Zoom rooms drop into each one of those, what that means is that each Zoom room has a back and forth. So you can talk back to them, you can send them program, but you can also give them notes and everything else. And they don't need to have Unity or anything else because they do have to have headphones, so that there's no accidental like them hearing the comms going back in. So anyway, so you can put them all in there. Now, what you're going to do is build a mix minus for all of them if they're all talking to each other. So this is if you have like 3 or 4 people that are off site and 3 or 4 people in site. You have to build a mix minus so that they hear everybody but themselves. A mix minus is it's an aux bus that can be done in analog or in digital, that basically has everybody up except for the person. Each person has its own bus, and the one slider pulled down for each bus is themselves. So it's the mix minus themselves. So that is how you'd build that out. Now and you have to do that for anybody ever interacting with a mic. Everybody, if they're listening to it, they need that. Now, the next thing that you do is you're going to feed that audio in, and you're going to use what's called the Dugan Auto Mix, and that there's 8 channels of Dugan in the X32. So you can't go any higher than that in that sense. Now, Dugan makes a lot of other products. You can get a Dante product from Dugan that does 64 channels of Dugan, and you can break them up into groups, and you can do a lot of other things. A little box, so that can be done. So, but what's in the X32 is 8 channels, and so then. Now what you do is you set that Dugan up. Now what the Dugan Auto Mix is designed to do is create what we used to use was gates, expanders, those types of things that would attenuate with some other mic, and it was very crude. And what Dan Dugan figured out is that he built an algorithm that basically gently pushes other mics down. So when it sees one mic sticking out, it pushes the other ones down. It sees another mic sticking out, it pushes those down. And so what it does is it kind of gently gets rid of a lot of the other mics. When you're talking about roundtables, this is a must-have. Like, I will not do a roundtable, Zoom or no Zoom, without the Dugan Auto Mix. It's life-changing. You put 6 people up on a table, and you put those mics on the Auto Mix. Now you don't have all that noise floor just being fed in at full res, and you don't have to do it manually. And you can still do a little bit of tweaking manually. And then Dugan has a bunch of settings, and I'm not very good at the settings. Dugan has a pile of settings that Brian Maddox knows how to use better than I do. So I can kind of get them working, but I'm not great at it because I have Brian do these things. So anyway, so the but then what you do is you have to sit in the room, and what you're doing with the Dugan Auto Mix is you're setting it up so that when people speak on the stage, the people off site get their mics pushed down. And usually we're doing this one person. So I gave you an option for doing many, but let's just say one person's talking from somewhere else. When people are talking on the stage, we want it to press down on the person. That way it's pushing their mic out of the system, so you don't hear them back. When the person talks, it pushes the mics down that are on stage so that they don't feed back to them. And you have to sit there and tweak it. There's no way to get the settings right just to set and forget and walk in. I mean, you will set and forget eventually, but you need rehearsal. The room is different. The mics are different. Everything's different once you get there. So what you have to do is get there, and you have to have someone come in over Zoom and have a conversation with someone in the same place that they're going to be. Like, they can't be in the back of the room talking into a mic. They have to, if they're going to wear a lav, they need to wear the lav on stage. They need to be looking out at people, and they need to talk to that person. And then we sit there and we tweak it until the auto mix is working properly. So that's the way we set all of that up. And then now we're kind of ready to go, for this auto mix. We still try to test it, and we always want to break. So when someone says we're going to do this roundtable, we always suggest that there's a cookie break, or there's a lunch break, or you do it first thing in the morning. And the reason we do that is we want to bring that person in and do one more test into the room right before the show. So even though we've rehearsed it the day before, we've done all the tech, we want to rehearse it one more time and say, hey, can you hear me? Hey, can I, back and forth? Because once you get into the show and it doesn't work, there's nowhere to go. So it's just like, it's being like in a plane and you're at 30,000 feet and the engines are on fire. There's nothing to do except just enjoy the ride to the ground. But that's what it feels like when you don't get this right. just so you know, like it is like being in a plane. It's on fire, and and you're just going to ride it in, because there's nothing to fix during the show. Like there's no way to get this out other than to stop doing it. So anyway, that's how you get the auto mix to work. I mean, you can try to manually do it, but we've done these all over the world. And when you get it right, no executive wants to travel ever again. Like when you get it wrong, they never want to do it again. They never want to work with you again. They never want to see you again. So it's a really powerful tool, but it's a really, it's sharp knives. So be very scared when you get into these things. I have one coming up where we have two locations that need to talk to each other, and then we need to broadcast that out. so there's and there's potentially people off site for that, and so that this becomes a very complicated mesh of problems. And so but you want to be very, very concerned about these kinds of things. They're magical when they work, and we haven't had one go bad for a decade, but the first ones were uncomfortable. Mitchell?
If we don't have Brian Maddox to pilot the plane when the engine's on fire, is there a quick preset that'll get you started? Because I'm concerned about how much time it would take to master all the intricacies.
There's no preset. Every room is different. And so you need to, what there is rehearsal. So you need, if you haven't done this before, you want to block out 2 hours the day before to work through it, and you'll figure it out. Read a lot about Dugan, really understand how it works and get it. But just know that, like, Brian will do it in a couple minutes. Like, he'll just listen to it, and in 15 minutes, it'll all be working. Sometimes 5. Like he kind of, and we can try to get him on at some point. I think he's in a really heavy production pipe right now, but and maybe we'll do it. I have a place to do that with open speakers. So maybe we'll get Brian to do it for us, so that we can hear it. And so we'll work on that. Maybe in the future when it won't be until the summer, because the next month I think he's busy almost every day. But we'll work on that. But he does it really, really fast. And he also does it through other engineers. Like, we'll go, what is your mixer? And then we take over their mixer and run it in Morocco. So it's it is one of the most, it's a really great thing for hybrids if you're going to do hybrids. And this is hybrid, bringing speakers. And sometimes, most of the time we do it, the entire event is in the room, but we're bringing typically a VIP in, because if you look at like a CEO, the cost of taking a CEO, especially let's say a Fortune 10 company, the cost of taking the CEO, their entourage, everything else to Singapore, let's say, might be, that might cost them $100,000, $200,000 to do minimum, and that's not their time. like the CEO's time of lost. So that's the flights. That's the there's security. There's people. There's all the other things you have to kind of calculate. So for you to charge, if it's whatever it is to do it, it's way cheaper, and they like it because they're not. You have to think about the efficiencies of for a CEO of not having to have jet lag, and so and they don't like it. So most CEOs don't. They're over the world travel thing, and so anyway, so it's really, really powerful. I would highly recommend people getting good at it, but just know that this is the reason that it's really cool and that people love it is because it's really dangerous, and it's like, but it's you just really want to think through it. Go ahead, Mark.
That was really a great explanation of it, because I've been trying to do this for a while now. On the X32, in the interface, when you're in the computer, is there a place you go where the Dugan auto mix pops up? Is there a tab you're supposed to be in?
Yes, and I can't think of it off the top of my head. I haven't had to do it for years because I have done it in Africa for some shows, but I don't remember how to get there. But that's a Mickey question that might be answered in after hours, and he can probably bring it up. And we can open I'm happy to do a lab in after hours on it where we kind of figure it out. I think that Mickey could probably do that as well. But we'll take a look at maybe figuring that out and maybe open up that interface so we can see where that is. It's something we'd love to show people how to do. So I'll work on that. Next question.
And from Adrian Albach in Brisbane, Australia, more Unity comm woes. On Mac Mini M1, I changed the sound setting in Zoom and Unity crashed. Rebooted, removed it, reinstalled it. Now it won't run at all. Help.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
The only thing they're leaving out is what version of Mac are they running? Are they running Monterey? Which flavor of it? And what other programs might be in there that could interfere with that? Because I'm running it no problem on Monterey 12.3.1.
And you're on Monterey on an M1, and
Yes.
It's working fine with Zoom. So it also, there could be some other something else that's asking for sound that's in there somewhere. So think about ask that question again, but think about anything else that could be running. Is Dante Virtual Sound Card running? Is there is Loopback running? What are the other things that could be running in your system? Next question.
From Fred Eric Eckert and Brad Hernheim, Germany, Atomos announced the Atomos Cloud Studio at NAB 2022. For live switching in the cloud, they included MAVIS Broadcast. There's a link for it. What are the panelists' thoughts about it?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Well, it's all based on the video. It's about a 9-minute video, but it's definitely worth watching, and I'd love to have them on for a second hour. 1080p is one of the limitations. They said they had, I think it was 5-frame switching, or 5-frame latency moving between. But what they have is they have a protocol, and I forget what they're calling it. I want to say MDLP. It's MAVIS. And on that protocol, they're guaranteeing that if 4 cameras leave together, or if they're synced together and they are sent using this protocol, when they arrive to the online switcher hosted by AWS, they will all be in perfect sync, therefore allowing for that. Even though the delay from the time you push the button until the switch takes place may be 2 frames, all of those camera feeds will be in sync on the cloud. So it's an interesting protocol.
Yeah, and 5 frames, like for music or sports, it could be a little rough for 5 frames, 150 milliseconds. But for most things that we're doing, education, corporate, discussions and everything else, it would be completely acceptable. So I think that is, I've already pinged them based on that question. I sent out an email to them. So we'll see if they'll join us. I'm sure they will. So anyway, so if I can get to the right person, so we'll some future day in the next couple of months, we'll hopefully have them on. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer from Viera, Florida. Can you please recommend a good but lower cost headphone app for a home office? Thanks.
Mitchell.
There's a bunch of them out there. If you go on Sweetwater, you can check them out. Presonus makes one. Aphex has them. And they're usually very small, and they have the ability to connect via a DAC through an USB connection. It's just a endless number of personal headphone amplifiers out there.
Yeah, go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, the Dell X I'll find the link for it. You can buy them on eBay for $13.95. What they are is they're the Dell below the monitor headphone amp that they used to sell with the monitors. Many corporations got the monitors, got the amps with them, and then never installed them. This is what happened at my university. Therefore, I literally have a pile of 15 in a room. You add a little power supply to it, and the amazing thing is it's a 3.5 millimeter in. They do sound really good, but it has two, and this is why I love them, two headphone jacks out the side. I often have students that there's two of them editing the same project at the same time. They're in a lab with other students. Therefore, that sound isolation is an amazing feature.
So this is not necessarily a low cost one, but this is a HIP DAC, so digital audio converter. So this is the HIP DAC, and I think that Andy Anatko got us hooked on this, or Leo, I can't remember which one. And it's this is not super inexpensive. It's $180. It sounds amazing. Like I just will say that I didn't think it made any difference, but it does. So it's relatively small. Again, as a headphone amplifier, it's not. But if you're looking for a DAC, this is pretty nice as well. Next question.
Next question from Douglas Carmichael. When I think about my career and life goals, I not only want to work in media technology, but work in or around an organization that is moving the industry forward as we are. Where do you see that happening now and in the next 3 to 5 years?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I think some of the big companies, after the pandemic, people realized corporate communications need some drastic changes to it. And I think the big companies that are driving the ball forward are Amazon, Microsoft, and Zoom. Douglas, you ask a lot of varied questions with a lot of different interests, which shows me that you're really curious. The problem with these big companies is that they really like specialists who focus on one thing and do that one thing all the time. So you might consider looking at a smaller company and becoming more of a generalist who can help a small company implement some of these newer technologies that corporations are driving forward.
The funny thing that I've noticed in corporations is you're absolutely right that there's a huge focus on people being very good at what they specialize in, so they get what they pay for. But the magical folks that are floating around, what I call the linchpins of the company, are generalists who have been there for 20 years and know everybody. And they're the ones, they're kind of like the neurons that kind of pull all the stuff, they're pulling all this stuff together, and they're making sure that this team is talking to that team and that team is talking to this team. And there's always about, I don't know, there seems always to be about 10 or 15 of them that are floating around. And they don't really, you go, I don't really know what they do. Like they don't, I don't know what that person does, but they're a very important piece of the puzzle. But you're absolutely right that in a large company, you're going to get often specialized into something specific. So I think that hopefully we're going to get bigger too. So we'll see how that goes. We'll turn this into something that might have staff. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Alex, it sounded like you were describing ILM there for a second.
The funny thing is that at ILM, I didn't have that limitation at all. So at ILM, if you were in CG, you were a little bit more focused. You were a compositor, you were a modeler, you were a hard surface modeler, or character modeler. There's a lot of specialties. At the Rebel Mac unit, we were all generalists. So there was probably, I think there was 10 or 12 of us. Stu Mashowitz was my office mate. And but there was Craig Lynn and whole bunch of other folks that all of us knew how to composite. We knew how to model. We knew how to texture. We knew how to light. We knew, so we were putting all of those things together, which was very, very rewarding. You got to do a little bit of everything. So when you got a shot, I won't say that I did the whole shot. So like, for instance, I might do a shot where the Queen ship is handed to me as the model, but I textured it. I figured out how it was going to be composited. I did all the renders. I did all the compositing. I did the final frame outs, for that, or the Earth or the Alderaan or whatever might be. That might come as a matte painting as a plate, and then I would put all the stuff into it. And so you didn't necessarily not Alderaan though. It was Coruscant. So Alderaan was, Alderaan was there at the time. So it was pretty cool. So, so those. You get pieces from other people, but you got to do everything. I mean, everything down to the modeling the little ships that I had in the background and everything else. And so I didn't have that limitation at all at ILM. But I see it, definitely in large corporations that I've worked in.
Rebel Mac unit. What was that?
Rebel Mac unit. Yeah. So John Knoll and Stu Mashowitz, I think, also was part of this scheme. But Stu and John and persuaded George that, hey, we should find a cheaper, faster way to do some of these shots. Like, we don't need the whole CG pipeline for hard surface stuff. So, these space shots and so on and so forth, the stuff that John could do in his house by himself. Like, when you go back and look at the re-releases of SW456, all of the space shots were done by an 840. I believe all of them were done on an 840 AV at John's house, like over weekends. Like, it was literally like he rebuilt all of those shots himself. And when I say he did them, he did the whole shot. Like, he did he modeled the X-wings, textured the X-wings, animated the X-wings, composited the X-wings, like everything. So the idea was to take what John was doing and figure out a way to do it in a, get a group of people that were doing that. So it was more efficient and faster. And so in some ways we were kind of an extension of the Digital Matte crew. Digital Matte was right next to us. So those were Yusei Wesky and Paul Houston and the crew. And so they were right next to us, but we were kind of our own thing doing hard surfaces. So we were doing most of the space shots, so when the Queen ship's in space, about, I think, almost every shot in SW1, those are my shots. And so so anyway, those, for better or for worse, there's one that jumps to hyperspace that's really bad because I doubled up on the specular highlight and they still finaled it. So anyway, I'm still bitter about that after 25 years. It was a wondrous place to work. It was probably I did work in CG for a little while. I was moved over there to do modeling for I modeled something in the Senate Rotunda in studio, and I realized, oh my gosh, I would never want to do this. Like, I would never want to just sit here and model all day. I love modeling. At the time I was doing Form Z, and I learned Alias Studio to do that. But I just love the idea that I could take a shot and craft it all the way through. Now, it might take 9 weeks or 8 weeks or 6 weeks to do one shot. So, you didn't measure things in seconds, you measured them in frames. Like, my shortest one was 15 frames, that little hyperspace one that I'm still angry about. My longest one was 239 frames. Yeah, and so it was that one took 9 weeks. So you just worked on those little bits. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, you just reminded me of something. I recently read a study that said people who are happiest at work spend at least 20% of their day doing something they love, but there's not really much return on investment after that 20%. And when Alex said, I was doing this all day, it's easy for something you love to become something you despise. So consider that as well.
Yeah, I never despised it. So I think that there was, there's been lots of times when I worked on stuff that for the first year and a half, I was working at the Skywalker Ranch. And I will say that every day I walked in just going, I can't believe I work here, and I worked on the third floor of the main house. So it was really pretty special time there. And I think that I decided to go to ILM because I wanted to get, I just wanted to do final shots. I had, all the stuff I did was kind of rough looking, and I really wanted to push my own ability. In some cases, I did enjoy ILM a lot, and I learned in both places. I learned everything I know about film. I didn't know anything when I got there. Like, literally, I didn't even know what line of direction was when I arrived at Lucasfilm. And so everything I learned was in 3 years of Lucasfilm and ILM, and so I learned a lot, and I'm really glad I got to work at the Rebel unit. There were some parts that I missed because I love the fast and furious part of Lucasfilm, where we were just producing 25 shots. Our group was producing 25 shots a week, just like of really lower res, faster, fast and furious, and you were telling a story. At ILM, you were really telling one little word. You were basically spending instead of telling the whole story, you were like scraping off rust off a little word. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Be a mentor or find a mentor and then be a mentor. I think that's never going to change. It always moves the industry forward because somebody's either teaching you skills or you're embedding the skills and teaching someone else. So that would be my challenge. I know that not everyone's set up to, be a teacher per se or in that profession, but certainly there are media opportunities in education.
Yeah. Way to bring it back, bring that conversation back into the fold. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael again. Have there been major productions using Nuendo for post-production audio? With Pro Tools moving to subscription only, I could see many independent professionals moving away from it.
I think it'll be hard to crack the Pro Tools thing. I think that, the folks who use Pro Tools are pretty committed to what they're doing. Like that is the thing that they know how to do. So I don't see the subscription, and the subscription cost for most people using Pro Tools is a scratch across the surface of what they charge and what it costs to do it if they're really a professional doing it. So I don't see a lot of movement, but Nuendo is very popular, especially, I mean, we've definitely seen Nuendo being used, especially in surround work. Their tools are very good in Atomos production and so on and so forth. So it's a great package. Go ahead, Roscoe.
A quick story about how slow the industry does move away from things. I had a student who went on to be the number 2 editor at NYPD Blue when it was still on top of its game. Yeah, NYPD Blue. And the chief engineer came in and said, "Okay, guys, what didn't work on the Avid system? What do we need to fix this year?" And everyone said, "No, we're great." He said, "Great, we're not upgrading a thing." And they didn't upgrade for the next 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. Because if the buttons work, the buttons work. So go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, Pro Tools requires a big commitment to learn it because it's very deep, mainly because it's been around so very long. And once you've got that muscle memory in operating it, you're not going to be in a hurry to move to anything else, no matter who makes it.
Yeah, I kind of regret the fact that I actually bought a Pro Tools rig, and I didn't know this when I bought it, but the salesperson made it sound like it had been around for a long time, but I bought it 3 months after it was released. Pro Tools won $6,000 hardware and thing, and so I paid it off in 3 months, but I should have. I look back now and I'm like, if I'd stuck with that, I probably would have done okay. It was magical and not very complicated. When I open it now, I'm like, this doesn't look anything like I can't recognize anything that was there. Next question.
Chris Widener from Lafayette, Indiana. Is Australian video on the 3060 or 2550 spec?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Up until 2013, it was on the 2550. It's a PAL country, but in 2013, they shut down all their analog transmission and went totally to digital. And at that point in time, there isn't really a frame rate per se that you have to abide by, but I would still say they would probably be happy with 2550.
Which is why all your Blackmagic stuff shows up, preset to 50 or 25. Drives me crazy. Next question.
Paul Wallace from Austin, Texas. Why can't commercial fiber offer speeds comparable to residential fiber? Google is $70 for 2 gigabytes up, and down spectrum is $400 for 30 MPS.
Go ahead, John.
So when you're talking about bandwidth and spectrum in commercial settings versus consumer, you're not talking about speed. You're talking about quality of service. You're talking about uptime guarantees. Often referred to as the number of nines, whether it's 5, 7, or 9. You're looking at 99.999%, 99.97%, whatever guarantees they're giving you, that you're going to be up and running, and you're going to have that bandwidth at that quality. Consumer grade, especially with cable modems, are going to downgrade your service levels. They're going to have more dropouts. So that's why you're getting a less expensive.
Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, so that's the business I'm in, and this is it's complex, but I would say generally the difference is that you're on a shared network. You're shared with the neighborhood. You're shared with people who are around you. They call them GPON networks. If it's fiber, they call it, in the cable business, if it's copper, it's a shared network. Whereas commercial fiber is usually a direct route into the core. And so not only do you have SLAs, that's a big part of it, but you'll also, in addition to that, have a team of people who are
Can you define SLA for people?
Yeah, so service level agreement is the agreement time frame in which things happen. So it could be, let's say you have an outage. Let's say the fiber falls off the pole. We had that happen recently where a truck ripped the fiber down and the power company cut it. We had 4 hours because of our service level agreement to replace that, or there was a cost that we have to pay out on that. Now, the problem is the SLAs don't matter to the people who actually lose a ton of money. So Microsoft doesn't care about your SLA because they might lose $1 million in a minute. So what they care about is that your redundancy and your resiliency in the network really matters. So the problem is when you're comparing a commercial fiber to like a home internet, you have a very different design path. There's so many complex things that happen in the background. I will tell you this, with commercial fiber, you can negotiate. In fact, Paul and I've had this conversation. There's no reason you cannot spend time negotiating with, because that sales guy wants to sell you that service. They have room to sell it to you for cheaper. And you should definitely negotiate if you have some leverage.
Great input. Mark?
I can't add to that. Eric said it all. I was going to talk about the shared part of it.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, Spectrum is a good example, by the way. Spectrum oversubscribes their residential at a level that is criminal. Like it is. They should not be allowed to have residential. Their commercial is very conservative and very good. Like the Spectrum, totally. If you get commercial, it's fine. But they're making sure that you're going to get 30/30 by not oversubscribing those lines. So you get what you ask for when you do commercial with Spectrum. You get nothing you ask for, and far below what you need if you get Spectrum for residential. It is. We have prepped thousands of people, so we have very strong opinions about certain services. Like Spectrum is the bottom. Like it is the worst residential out there. AT&T is their universe or whatever thing, again, is slightly better than Spectrum. Like it is again, both of those are near criminal, now not in Austin though, because Google put Google Fiber in, and AT&T was like, oh, right, we could do a gig for not very much money. Oh, right. As Eric said, this is all money being just like on top of nothing. Like, they just, they put money into the lines, but everything, it's all sunk costs and everything is just gravy. And so to do what they're doing is again, criminal. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I'm using Comcast Business, and I had Comcast Residential, and I didn't notice much difference, except the business seems to be messed up by DNS servers dropping at some point. Mm-hmm. And if you go over to the residential side, which I can do, it doesn't seem to be affected as much. So in this case, business is not better in this particular location.
Yeah, we have Comcast in both. I have both commercial and residential. I have residential at home, Comcast at the office. We've had Comcast at the office, and I do find that the Comcast is much more reliable. The commercial, and you don't get any kind of, even though they say it's unlimited, and my residential, I'm pretty sure I'm getting clamped down at the end of each month. So I think that I don't fully think that that's there. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I have Comcast at home, even though I don't work for Comcast, because that's the only thing I have the ability to get. I use about 3 terabytes a month. I find generally it's pretty good. Some of that has to do with the technologies they've spent money on in the upgrade. Now, I think Comcast, for the most part, has been spending a lot of money upgrading their core technologies, and I'm talking about in the residential and the small business realm. On their fiber side, they're very good. They have a very solid package. They tend to be more expensive, and that's where you can negotiate. I think it's really important to understand that when you think about your commercial service, that's more like guaranteeing your seat on an airplane. You're going to get that service. You can get it 24/7, 365, and they guarantee it with money backing it up. Whereas home service is more like flying standby. You might get a seat on the plane, you might not, and it might be at that critical time where it doesn't work for you. So I always suggest, especially like media streamers, I think it's really good to have a very small circuit that just is your stream, and you can actually buy routers that are like dual wide area network or dual carrier that allow you to say, okay, I want all my traffic from streaming to go one route, and I want everything else to go the other route. And that will actually serve you really well, I think, in the long run, because you're kind of balancing cost against reliability and resiliency.
Yeah, Mark.
So we had for years Comcast Business, but their coax product, and every day at 3 o'clock it would go down. We switched over to the fiber, a lot more money, but steady, very steady.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
And it's from Douglas Carmichael. In a video of a pianist performing a duet with Commander Michael Lopez-Alegria on the International Space Station, NASA mentions calling for a voice check. Would they be passing full bandwidth music down a link meant for voice? How would they get the latency low enough?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Voice check was just because they had a bit of a discussion right before they actually did the music portion of it. And they have a protocol that NASA uses. So probably voice check means, okay, I'm coming down this pipe versus I'm sure there's a data check also or something along those lines. That being said, actually watching the video, I don't feel like they were at all in sync. If anything, they would be cascading as the pianist on the ground was playing. The gentleman in the what was his name here again? Commander Michael Lopez was just syncing to it. And what we got as a result wasn't a wonderful thing. What they obviously could do is record at both ends, download the data, and somebody could sync it up in post. But as a live thing, it wasn't really that good.
Yeah, there's a couple ways to do that. One would be there's no way to get that in sync to the space station. It's a physics problem. So we've done work with the space station, and I think it's 625 milliseconds or something. So there's no way to make that shorter because it's going to space. And so you'll see that typically if you watch any of the ISS connections, you'll see them nodding for a second. Because that nodding, listening, there'll be a little bit of if you cut carefully, you won't feel it. If you hang just a little bit on the people on the ground and then cut to them after about a second, the audience doesn't feel it because you don't see so much nodding, but the round trip is takes a little bit there. As Roscoe said, they're definitely cascading that. You could have the music go up to him, have him add it and send it back. And that would probably work. The other way to do it would be GPS clocks on both ends so that they're playing to a click track. They're not really playing to each other. They're playing in a timed event. I doubt that they did that. I don't think that's probably NASA's specialty. But I think that, but when they do voice checks, they just want to make sure they can hear them. Usually it sounds something like, Houston, space station, this is Houston, do you read us? And then usually it comes back as, Houston, this is space station, we read you loud and clear. And so, not that I've heard that a couple of years. We have the whole script somewhere because we rehearse it for hours to make sure that we know what they're going to do when they do that. Next question.
Fascinating. And next question from David Brady, regular panelist from New York City. Returning to my friend's food truck build-out, what are some considerations for in-vehicle displays? Should we spec out 12-volt devices or invert power? Also, any ideas to integrate a full streaming setup that can be set and forget?
Yeah, so I think that I would stick with inverters. It's not going to take any more. It's not going to draw any more energy. That plugging those things in. I probably wouldn't try to spec out 12. I have done that with the 12 volt. It just becomes this thing like everything. I'd rather just build a bunch of things out that I can plug in. It's not a higher draw, to do the inversion because it's the same number of amps that the device is asking for. But what it does do is becomes this thing where you have a new device that you have to keep on figuring out how you're going to plug it in. So, I would, most of the devices that we deal with aren't as heavy anymore. I mean, of course, you want to think about probably having some kind of very large marine battery that's going to do, that's going to be the backup to whatever you're doing. And I don't know how you're going to stay, I don't know whether you're using a generator. If you are using a generator, the Honda 2000 is particularly quiet and it probably would cover a lot of what you're doing. It's most of the, you're an open mic, Mitch. The Honda is a pretty low cost and very quiet one to keep something like that running. And it'll run one Honda 2000 will run most or all the electronics that you need, for an average setup. As far as a set and forget, I think that, there's a couple different boxes that you could get. This is where, I will admit, again, I've had a lot of unhappiness with Epiphan, but Epiphan may be something you want. The pearls, are very turnkey to make that work. The other one to think about would be the one that I use and the one we're using for the show right now is the Elemental Link, but it will add up if you do it a lot. But it'll cost you $1,000 only, but then it costs you, $1.50 a minute, $1.60 an hour, not a minute. So if you do it a couple hours a day, it's not that big of a deal. If you do it a lot, 24/7 or something, it'll get expensive. So you should think about a real encoder at that point. So those, and then the other one to think about is there is a new encoder that just came out from AJA, and I can't think of the name of it right now, but the new encoder that they came out with, I know a lot of people that are pretty happy with it. It's called the Hilo. The Hilo, it's an H.264 streaming and record unit, and I don't know how much it costs, but I've heard people have had a lot of success, and they are a reputable company to buy from. Next question.
And it's for me. What are your favorite video effects plugins?
Go ahead, Mitchell. You're doing a Cochran. Mitchell's doing a Cochran.
I know. I was going to say, what is that kickback thing?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a chance to brag about my plugins. I think he who dies with
We'll
the
go
last-
pretty quickly because we still have a bunch of questions.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
Great. I like the Boris suite of plugins for all the stuff they have. I like Mocha. I think that's a wonderful rotoscoping program for tracking and inserting footage. It's just deeper and deeper every time they add something to it. Over on the other side, Red Giant, which is now Maxon. I love Magic Bullet. It's just a fun color correction system that really emulates film in a wonderful way, and their interface is awesome.
Next question.
Next question from Simon Ray, sorry, Simon, Shrewsbury, UK. A camera can be a silent narrator with camera techniques such as dolly, zoom, Dutch angle, or focus pulling. What are your favorite camera techniques, and what do they convey to the audience?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Anything that moves the camera in a third dimension to give a two-dimension screen a third dimension, I'm in favor of. Making them look appropriate in a narrative story is, as soon as you bring attention to the camera, then you're distracting the audience to what's going on in front of it. So I'd say use them very sparingly. Other than that, comedy is an over-the-shoulder, drama is a close-up. Those would be my two camera techniques I'd stick with.
My brother's a Steadicam operator, and I will admit that having worked with him for years, that my favorite shot is a Steadicam shot. And when I love great Steadicam shots, like watching. When you see someone, and when you know what it takes for a Steadicam operator to do what they do, and you watch a long shot. So one of my favorite Steadicam shots is in The Matrix, in the when Morpheus is fighting Neo. And there's a shot where he gets up and he puts his hands out like this, and this thing is coming. It circles. It comes all the way around, and at every moment, it's perfectly framed in thirds. Like, it is just this stunning. I mean, it is one of the most amazing Steadicam shots I've ever seen, because it's just framed so perfectly all the time, telling this, as Roscoe said, telling the story. It's just amazing. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Okay. Sorry, I was putting the link in for the Goodfellas. I will just drop it in. The Goodfellas Steadicam shot entering into the nightclub. It's one of my favorites. And if you route that, you'll actually notice they walk back on themselves. But as they went around corners, if you're not tracking closely, you will not even figure that out.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, Steadicam, economy of movement. It's a wonderful thing. It's beautiful and fluid, especially if you're shooting at 120 and you bring it back in, you have that option of being able to do it.
Another shot that I like a lot is it's not a Steadicam. It's in Born Identity when he jacks the phone. It's like in the second one, not the Born Identity, the Born Supremacy or whatever. And he's in Italy, and he's in customs, and he flashes the phone. He dupes the phone, and it's the editing and the camera work of just showing what he did. In a couple seconds, they tell the entire story of what he just did to that phone, and you're totally clear of what happened there. And as a storytelling element, I think it's super valuable, because they told this whole story in seconds visually, and you totally understand, oh, he copied his phone. So it's just a really interesting thing. Anyway, next question.
Next question from Guy Cochran in Seattle, USA. Why would one use a hardware VPN versus a software VPN for remote production, controlling lights, cameras, etc.?
Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, this is somewhat of a complicated question, but I would say generally hardware is more resilient, and especially in hardware like Meraki is a good example, where you can actually have dual carriers attached to it. It's not something you can do with the software VPN very easily. What I try to do is get as close to plugging into a switch as possible. I will say there is a solution from wireless carriers that can be really helpful if you don't want to spend a lot. It's called an APN, and it allows you to plug into any device that you might have, and that APN gives you a direct link inside of their network from one end to the other. And most wireless carriers go across the country. You could connect in New York and then connect in LA and never actually be on the public internet with an APN. And there's a lot of solutions you can use for that effect. So that might be one to check out.
Hey, go ahead, Mark.
So I'm really thinking that if you have two hardware VPNs on either end, that allows you to mix operating systems and not have to worry about the client that they give you for that VPN and trying to get it to work on Mac or Windows or Linux or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that there is a the value of the hardware, the biggest value of the hardware is it's super easy to plug anything in that needs to be the VPN, as opposed to, and one of the things that we do with our Meraki's, as Eric was talking, because I use a lot of Meraki's to do this stuff, is that we will the hardware itself is not only a VPN, but it's a router. So basically we're telling all the equipment based on their MAC address what their IP will be when they hit the Meraki. So now we have all these remote Meraki's that are all tied into a VPN, and Meraki 5 is 10.5. That is a huge advantage because, or 10.1.5. Whatever the number is for the thing. The advantage of that is now if I know that person remotely is at system 5, I just go up there and I can just type in the number and I have the switcher, or I have the this, or I have the that, and I don't have to know anything else about the system. And so, mixed with routing, it's pretty powerful. Go ahead. Next question.
And Idris Hagai from Fairfax, Virginia asks, in combining wireless microphone and the receivers with the USB preamp interfaces, how do you best connect both wireless systems with preamp interface with additional wired mics and send all those signals to Zoom?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Sorry, you got to keep that window open. If I read this question properly, there's two parts. And when you say USB preamp interface, are you just using the USB for power? Then obviously you can combine them together in any classic switcher to get them in. Two things to get in. If I'm inside a Mac, I can use loopback and audio hijack to combine multiple signals coming into a Mac and send those to Zoom. That way it's not an active mixer. It's more of a set it and forget it. So you set it up, get all your levels done and work with it. And then conversely, if you have something like an ATEM Mini, you can certainly route stuff in through the HDMIs if you can plug into cameras, or they actually do have two 3.5 millimeter inputs. Not highly recommended for anything mic level. Certainly works well for a line level. So, and then the ATEM Minis, if you come out the USB, it turns that signal into a webcam signal, which then you can run into a computer and put into Zoom.
Next question.
And the next question from Douglas Carmichael. The IBM zSeries servers and many other large computing systems require three-phase power on an IEC 60309 CEE-Form connector. Why could that be? And why does the production industry, at least in North America, use 5 separate Cam-Lok connectors?
It's outside of my skill set. We'll wait for someone. Well, maybe we'll get somebody that can talk about power. I don't know. Next question.
Hashid in Daytona Beach, Florida. Could lifters versus SE Dynamite, cloud lifter versus SE Dynamite, thoughts?
I guess what I would say is that all of these are going to add a significant amount of noise to what you're doing. So any of these cheap little amplifiers it's cheap. They're cheap little amplifiers. What you should really think about is finding a preamp, something with a preamp that has the gain that's necessary for it to work. The cloud lifter is the most popular one, but they are, cheap electronics. And so you're now pushing something that matters potentially through something that is going to add to the noise floor and not react to a lot of other things well. So I would think about the whole pipeline, Mitchell. Courtney
had mentioned that the cloud lifter affects your phantom power, so you must be careful.
It's problematic all the way through. So people use them, but really think about whether if you're using a cloud lifter, think about the quality of what you're putting it into and why it needs that. So it's not, that means that its preamp is probably not great either. So audio really matters, and I think that putting these little band-aids in is oftentimes problematic. A lot of times we have I typically have a cloud lifter somewhere in my backpack to fix something if I absolutely have to, but it is not something that I will do by choice. Next question.
Chris Taylor from Carlsbad, California. If one would like to build or have built a semi-complex database-driven website, where would you start?
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell. Can't hear you, Mitchell.
Pardon me. I would work with SQL. because it's the standard and works with most database based websites, as it were.
Yeah, what I would say is that I agree. The issue with something like a MongoDB or something like that is that you'll hit a ceiling and now you're in. Like you'll build a whole thing around some of these turnkey solutions. And the only thing I'll say is make sure that whatever solution you do is a proper relational database. It is not, it's not, so it needs to be relational or you're going to have a problem. You're going to hit a ceiling on it. Next question.
Eric Nathan from Bellingham, Washington. I'm getting a new ATEM Mini Extreme ISO in a few days. Any tips or secrets I should know?
Go ahead, Mark.
Don't use a Thunderbolt cable as a USB cable. We've had issues with that.
There you go, John.
Yeah, I figured that one out too, Mark. Turn the lights on the keys all the way to the lowest level.
Yeah, absolutely. John.
Yeah, if you use Microsoft Teams, having an ATEM does not change your organization's bandwidth rules. And so if you try to use your ATEM as a screen share, you're going to get really low quality in Teams. And I think you do use Microsoft Teams.
Yeah. And also just know how the app works, how your whatever, like Blue Jeans, for instance, doesn't automatically show you and you're all down in little corners. So you try to do a demonstration and Blue Jeans, your little demonstration is like a little window down there. It is. So it's bad. Go ahead, John.
So I got two tips. One was a long fought 9-month ordeal for me, and that is the HDMI cables you use are important, and it doesn't matter if they're connected to the camera or something else. They can affect your camera control. So use eARC cables or ARC cables to control anything connected to your ATEM, not just the camera. The second one, get a Stream Deck and use that to control your ATEM. It's a wonderful thing. It'll allow you to do buttons. You can even show which camera's live on your thing, and it's either smaller or bigger, but it's good options there.
Good, Mitchell.
Plus one on what John just said. Plus, when you do the Stream Deck, make sure you run MixFX Pro. It just makes it a wonderful switching experience.
All right. Next question.
And next question from Douglas Carmichael. In a large machine room, data center environment with 3-phase power on 4 or 5 wires, couldn't there be an issue with AC noise interference with audio or video?
Yes, absolutely. So 3-phase power and a lot of power is going to create issues, less with the video and more with the audio. So that's really where you get more of the hit there. And for 3-phase, when we're pushing like 100 amps on each leg, that is somewhere else other than the audio. Like the audio is somewhere else in the room, as far away from that as possible. Go ahead, John.
So Enron, during their height, built a data center here in Las Vegas, which was acquired by Switch Communications, and they had DC power plant. And so you had to provide your machine that had DC power rather than AC power. It was spectacular. The cable and the copper that they put in this facility was amazing. Then they went bankrupt and somebody picked it up for pennies on the dollar. It was an amazing story. But DC power, a lot of these data centers offer DC power as well.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
And to this day, I think most power that's going to come on that amperage or that size is going to be put into a large metal box, which is going to hopefully Faraday cage and keep some of that signal inside from getting out into your TV studio space. And then when you get LED lights that have DMX at the light head, you try and get rid of that big box with all that power in it.
Next question.
And it looks like it's the last question for the first hour. It's from J.J. McKenna in San Rafael, California. You're doing a great job today, Alex, but when is Emily coming back?
Everyone's like, it's fine. It's fine for Alex to be here, but when is Emily coming back? Emily just, I think that she needed a break. This is a process, and so we're hoping to have her back because she's invited to come back any given time that she wants to come back. She's learning to fly a plane. She's got a job. She's got all kinds of other travel going on, and she was finding that Saturday mornings were a really hard thing for her to do every Saturday morning. So she's just taking a little bit of a hiatus. I totally expect her to come back and join us. And anytime she comes back and wants to be host, I will happily hand it to her. So that's where things are right now. So she's doing a lot of things. So hopefully we'll get her back sooner than later. All right, so we are ending up a little bit early, and what I'm going to do is let everybody kind of talk amongst themselves a little bit while I get set up for the second hour. So I just want to make sure I realized that the computer wasn't routed correctly. So we'll leave the YouTube on. We'll let you guys talk about anything else you want to talk about here. If you have any other meandering questions, Mitchell will just keep on running with them. If any others come in, I'm just going to step away for just a second so that I can figure out the routing problem that I'm having. I got home late last night, and so I woke up this morning and realized something wasn't right. So I'm going to fix that right now. I'll be back in just a minute. I'll be back right at the top of the hour, 5 minutes.
John, you're using a Stream Deck to control your ATEM?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Through BitFocus Companion.
I'm also doing it with mixed effects, John.
Companion, right?
Yeah.
I appreciate your advice on that. So I have Mix Effect, and I've been using that for a while, mostly due to this panel. But in addition to that, I also have a Stream Deck. The issue for me is I want to know, like, where am I going to put it on the desk? I have a really small desk, so I'm like, I've got to figure out a spot for this.
Me too.
I recommend a super clamp that you can just put it in the air.
That's a great idea.
For me, I've got a very large desk, so it, hold on. Without giving anything, I have to change monitors so I don't give away secrets. Let's see here. Yeah. So you can see here, I've got a fairly large desk. So I got one Stream Deck over here. I've got another Stream Deck over here and another Stream Deck over here. So I got all three sizes.
What is the orientation of your desk to where you're sitting? Is it horizontal to the camera angle? So my question is, both your monitors at whatever that is, 15% angle with the camera in the middle?
Yeah, the camera's right here. It's actually, do you see the, well, you
but
can't
when
see
you
the other
normally
monitor.
work, how do you situate yourself?
Like this.
So you're facing right towards the camera. So you're having to move your neck.
Yeah, I just do
from
this.
side to side.
Yeah.
See, I have that issue with mine right now, the way my desk is set up. I just thought that would be inconvenient.
I got used to it. The thing is, if I have to, I actually kind of like it this way, because then I put the stuff I don't have to pay attention to over here, and then the stuff that I'm paying attention to goes over here. But the other thing I can do is, if I really need everything, is I can just pull the monitors together, and if I don't have any Zoom meetings, it works just great.
Hey, your audio sounds a little off today. I don't know why. It's tinny.
I don't know why.
It's not as full as it normally is.
Probably need a reboot. Microphone might be a little bit further away than normal.
That might be it.
Yeah. I was very loud this morning. So.
Mitchell, there is another first-hand question.
I've got a question for you in the meantime, guys, from Craig McFarlane in Boston. Did anyone put new things on your short-term purchase list after NAB? John, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to get one of those. I'd like to get one of those boring company tunnels from my house to my nearest pub. That's what I would like to have.
John Pewitt?
Yeah, these were announced just slightly before NAB, but they were, part of the NAB announcement. That's the Blackmagic. Oh God, what's the thing with the dial? The
Hyperdeck shuttle.
Yeah, that's really on my short-term purchase list. And I also want to get the cloud one that doesn't come with the drive. That's also on the purchase list, because both of those things I could use here. But the Hyperdeck shuttle's really number one on my list, because I can use it for teleprompting for my show. So I don't necessarily have to use it. I can use what I'm still currently using, which is an AI-based script prompter. But sometimes it doesn't work well. So I would rather have the option to have the shuttle just right over here, so I can just dial it while I'm reading.
John, do you find that if you're going to go the cloud route with the new Blackmagic design, can you kind of work your way into the cloud part of it with making it work as an NAS initially, and then getting it big and beefy?
Yeah, well, what I'm going to probably do is put it with a 2 gigabyte, or I'm sorry, a 2 terabyte hard drive. Right now, if that's my current editing choice, is the 2 terabyte hard drive with the cloud. And then since I'm working by myself, the main reason why I want to do it is so that I have the option of using it with my Ultra that's coming, my PC, which is fairly beefy with a 3080 card, and my MacBook when I'm not at home, so that I just have the option to be more flexible with my work locations.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Next question coming up. Harsha, Daytona Beach, Florida. During NAB, we discussed dynamic mics to capture the other interview. I came across the Evolve 946, a condenser handheld. Could it be a decent choice? Well, a condenser is an unusual choice for handheld, particularly since it picks up the sound from anything and everything around it. So I'm just wondering why you would want a condenser. I'm sure they're out there, but it's going to get body noise, the mouth sounds and clothing rustle. All those things are going to be an issue going ahead. Go ahead, John. You're muted. There you are.
No, I was unmuted. Are you good now?
You good?
I would think if you had a condenser, you'd have to have a noise gate on it to cancel all the the ancillary noise, because they do pick up everything.
And next question from Douglas Carmichael. We've talked about inclusivity and spectrum friendliness many times in different contexts. John, what would you think of an extension of the Talent Pros Live concept to assist those on the spectrum in entering and thriving in our industry? Go ahead, John.
So Talent Pros Live pivoted. We started off as an online agency to provide talent for virtual events. And what we found out that most of these organizations that we work with didn't want to hire any talent, except for one client that hires our cellist. So the beginning of the show, close the show, and lunch, we have a cellist that plays live. But we turned into a pure production company now. So we're just a group of guys providing production services remotely. And we have a diverse group of talent. We hired Jason Bache this week for a gig. And then we have people from around the world working on productions virtually. We don't do any on-premise productions. We do everything virtual.
Thanks, John. And another question before we get the second hour kicked off here from Chris Taylor in Carlsbad, California. John, I think they're referring to John Pewitt there. What do you use to hold your ATEM multi-view monitor? John?
So to go back here, I've got a monitor arm. I'll put a link to the one that I have. I wish it was a little higher, but it's just a very tall pole that it comes with that allows me to set the monitor arm up high. So I'll post a link in Makana to the exact one I'm using.
And I don't know
we
if
can go through.
Alex.
Let's go ahead and finish up.
Okay.
There's like 2 questions from the first hour. We can keep going.
Another question here from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. Has anyone tried a Z CAM IPMAN Gemini? There's a link there to it. That's it. That's the big link.
I don't know what the...
Anyone?
All of us are sitting there quickly.
Yeah, so what that is it allows you to use your phone as a monitor on top of your camera. So it looks like it takes the HDMI and converts it to something you can plug into an Android phone and then use the phone as a monitor on top of your camera.
Cool.
That is really cool. Sorry, like that solves a huge problem for me. Wow. I guess, and I guess it must be a dedicated application that, oh man. Yeah, that's really cool. Sorry. So getting live video into an iOS device has been something that a lot of us have talked about for a long time, of like, we could do a lot of really interesting things if we could only get the live video in there. So the fact that it's there that's super cool. I'll tell you how it works soon, because I'm going to buy one right now.
That sound you hear is Alex pulling out his credit card.
Yeah, exactly. All right, next question.
David Brady from New York City. More of a comment than a question. Using Stream Deck in companion with ATEM, you don't necessarily need the ATEM front and center. I keep a mini sub-switcher under the desk and use Stream Deck to punch up any of those inputs.
Nice. Very good. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael. Have you seen audio professionals that have used Windows PC in the studio, even in the Mac-dominant audio world?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
As a matter of fact, I have it on both. I have Adobe Audition on my Mac, and I have it on a PC, which is my narration studio. And I use the narration studio on a PC, but I'm going to be going over all Mac because of Windows 11.
I have seen PCs being used in audio facilities. I have to admit that I've never been in an audio facility where I saw a PC running Pro Tools. like, I'm sure that they are out there. It's just the ones that I walk into. I've never seen that. But they definitely have lots of PCs that are in the facility doing other things. But it's a rarity to see that for me anyway. And again, completely anecdotal, not industry data. All right. Now we're going to jump into our second hour, and we're going to talk a little bit about Keynote. Now, this is not going to be so much of a, I'm going to show you something about Keynote or someone here. It's more of us talking about Keynote, and even we can even be talking about slide design and process. So if you have questions about Keynote, and it can talk about presentations in general as well. We've got John here, and I've done a couple of presentations, and so we can talk a little bit about what those are. And we'll riff a little bit if we don't have questions. I've got some things to talk about a little bit about design and thought process and so on and so forth. But if you have questions about Keynote or presentations, especially as it relates to education, but it can be business and broadcast and so on and so forth, let's do it. I will say that as we get started, before we get into the questions, the reason that we're going to talk about Keynote probably at least once a month is because I think it's probably the most powerful communication tool in the world. Like we can learn Motion and Final Cut and Premiere and everything else, but the ability to put together something that can describe an idea easily without a lot of overhead, is unprecedented in this one app. And it's amazing that it's free, So I want to make sure that, we keep on answering people's questions, because I think that most people use Keynote like they use PowerPoint or like they use slides, and they barely ever touch what the app can do, and I think that it's worth, having a discussion about what it can do. And this is also an exploration. I'm hoping people who are experts in Keynote or presentations, pitch in, because I want to learn from other people as well. I know what I know because of what I do, but I don't know everything about Keynote. And so hopefully we'll get some more input from you. So if you have suggestions of things that you would like to talk about or questions, if you don't, we may riff for a little while, and then we'll take a break and get ready for education. So there's not a lot of questions in there right now. So it's going to be a real short trip. And then I'll decide that I have to do presentations before this instead of answering questions. So Mitchell.
I think we need to make up a term for people that used to be on Mac, then made it over to PCs, and then are slowly making the move and now rushing to make the move into a Mac again. And what I'm trying to say here is that I've used PowerPoint on PCs for a long time, and I've attempted to use it on a Mac. It's a different experience. But Keynote has always been just one other program in my bottom tray that I didn't often use. And I'm getting ready to make that transition. Please tell me what it's going to be like to make the transition from PowerPoint to Keynote on a Mac.
Yeah, John's nodding a lot. By the way, what we call people who do that is prodigal children. The prodigal children have returned. Anyway, so go ahead, John.
I can answer that question because I was a PC guy for a long time and got involved with Macs about 15 years ago. And I made the transition from PowerPoint to Keynote, and it's life-changing almost. The Instant Alpha is an amazing tool that I use. The cropping tools. So I'm a double E, so I use it for drawing out diagrams for stuff. So I spent a lot of time in Keynote. With the layout for the rocket, our camp was all done in Keynote. So any sort of thinking through things, I start in Keynote, and then if I need a more advanced tool, I'll move on. But it's an amazing tool, not only for presentations, but for organizing your thoughts. It's a fantastic tool for organizing thoughts as well.
Yeah. And to illustrate what John was talking about, Instant Alpha, if you haven't seen it, and it is like, I'm surprised that somebody else doesn't do this. I mean, I wish it was in a lot of other tools. In Instant Alpha, if I cut to this here, let me.
It's now in PowerPoint, but it doesn't work well.
Yeah, that's the problem. So let's say we have an ATEM constellation, and we go in here, and we just search for it, and I might go, I'm going to look at images. And so I see all these images here, and I go, oh, this is the one I want to use, right? And I can look at it. Some notes, by the way. You can hit Tools here in Google and hit Large, and then it'll limit your search to something that is large, which means it'll be just higher resolution. This is how to make a really large Keynote. Now, if you do this out of, I'm in Safari. If you drag this out of Chrome, it'll just end up as a URL. But if you drag it out of Safari into here, it will, it'll pull the image in, right? And so now we have this image that's in here. And what I can do is say, oh, I want to get rid of this. I want to get rid of the background here. And what I can do is go into Image and hit Instant Alpha and just tap it. Well, I'll tap and drag. So as I tap and drag, you can see it now. There's a little bit of I can keep on pulling until, now if I pull too far, it'll start grabbing into things. But I pulled enough to get rid of even the shadow. So you can see it. Now, sometimes it's not perfect, especially when I pull it that hard. But if I hit Done, now I'm here. And I can still go back in. Like, for instance, I can, if I hit Instant Alpha again, I can go in here and go, oh, I want that too. I want that too. I want this to go on. So like that, I can add to it and say Done. And there we have it. And again, when I do objects, now one thing I will say is that for a long time I did most of my keynotes over white. And the reason I do that is specifically because I'm using Instant Alpha. And a lot of times the edges for anything that you do, if it's softer or whatever, aren't perfect. And so if I change this theme to a white background, it looks better just because there's no little doodads that I have to kind of deal with there. So anyway, that's the Instant Alpha, and that's how it works. And it's really powerful, and you use it all the time. And the key is the thing that'll make it better is, again, when you're searching for an item that you want to put into your Keynote. And again, I don't do this for commercial things, but if I'm trying to show an idea, I mean, Google is your friend. So it was like they made a big deal that like Google presentations are, at Google are using images from the internet, and I was like, have you ever made like when I saw that article that there was like this thing, I was like, have you ever made a presentation? Like, have you ever made like you just go up and grab images, like you're not selling the thing. You're not pushing it in public. You're just talking about ideas. And of course you just do that. So you go up into, anyway, that's a long tirade about people in the stands talking about how the quarterback should play. So anyway, so you go to Google, set the tools to large, and now you have all large images. You find the images that you want, drag them in and do it. But you want to start with large images because your edges will be way better, and it'll just look nicer. The problem that you'll have is my slide decks are very large. So typically when I finish a slide deck, it's 200 to 300 megs. So then I have to export as a PDF, or I have to do something. And there's not, the one thing I do wish that Keynote would do is allow me to like save out a Keynote or save something out where it's resolution in place or something, but because it doesn't, when you save out a PDF, that's what it does. It kind of flattens it. So there's ways to do that, but it's a little bit more complicated. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, the phrase "it's in PowerPoint, just not as good" could be their marketing slogan. And to answer Mitchell's question, is some of the big differences is because it's a Microsoft product, PowerPoint uses the ribbon interface and Keynote uses the palette interface that is typical of Mac programs. So it can be difficult to find what you're looking for. But in both products, it's really about the principles behind it, and a good artist can make a masterpiece out of crappy brushes. And so I would recommend most people learn one first and learn it super well. And whatever your reason for choosing one of them is, doesn't particularly matter. What matters is you understand the principles behind it and what you want to do and what you want to send out.
I will say that that if you have the choice, like when I see people make PowerPoint slides on a Mac, I just want to shake them. just like, what are you doing? Like, I understand it if you have to do them and you have to submit PowerPoints to the rest of your company and they're all on PC and they're all that makes sense. But when they just like make one out of nowhere for just a presentation and it's on PowerPoint, it's not as good. Like it just, like you might as well use the best tool, and it's easier to learn Keynote. It's easier to use Keynote, and it looks better. You don't get that options very often. There's little things in Keynote. So, and I would love to do this side by side. I don't have PowerPoint on here right now. But one thing I will say is that one of the things that Keynote does better than PowerPoint is kerning. Kerning is the space between the words, and the anti-aliasing, so the soft edges around the words. And it's a super subtle thing, but you can look at someone's Keynote oftentimes and know that it's Keynote over PowerPoint, because PowerPoint is not great at that. And neither, slides is kind of a disaster in that area. So the kerning and the anti-aliasing is something that's really important to me anyway, to make it feel like it's like done. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I work for a corporation, and for some reason corporations feel that you have to use PowerPoint, and there's 47 slides in the deck. And so I often will talk about 2 or 3 slides, and then I want to have a conversation. And so I'll just rebuild it in Keynote. Also, I will say I'm the type of person who moved from the PC to the Mac at the beginning of the pandemic. And I did that mostly because I was using the iPad to produce motion graphics for a live streaming production we were doing. And Keynote was absolutely the best way to do that, because you can export as a video with a black background, Luma key it out, and it's like magic. It works so well that we barely tweaked it. And you can share it, because everybody who has a Mac already has this. You don't have to have a license to PowerPoint. You don't have to do all those things. For that reason, I switched to Mac entirely, and I will use Keynote first and foremost for presentations.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, one last thing. In general, the defaults of Keynote are just better, and they have better taste, and they have a stronger opinion than PowerPoint. PowerPoint is just vanilla. You can make it much nicer, but in Keynote, that's the default. And it just makes Keynote a better product overall.
Yeah, and what I will say is that large corporations use PowerPoint. What is good about Google Slides is that it's collaborative. Apple has Collaborate, in Keynote, and I almost never use it, because it gets into this thing like, oh, you can't do this because it's in the collaboration mode. Oh, you can't do this because it's in collaboration mode. And I get they're trying to keep it synced, but it damages my productivity so much that I never collaborate. And the worst part is that every time I met with folks at Apple in the aughts years ago, all I asked for was collaboration. Google has this, and I wish you had this, and I asked for it over and over and over again. And I don't know if I had any effect on it, but they finally put it in, and it's really painful to use. So I will say that is a problem with Keynote. Don't collaborate. Just send people the slide decks and get feedback or everything else. And maybe they'll improve it sometime, but it's a really painful thing to use for that. Next question.
David Brady in New York City. Is there a way in Keynote to add that blurred effect to the sides when adding vertical videos to Keynote's decks? Similar to the news where the blur is an extension or scaled version of the video.
I don't know if there is a way to do blurs in Keynote. I've never tried to blur something, or I've thought about it and didn't use it. Let me see if there's a, it's a good question. Because I don't know if it would make sense. I mean, given the power of all of this stuff now, because what I would do to your answer, what I would do if there was a blur in Keynote, put another layer, make it bigger, make it really big, and then blur it. And then that would be enough to put it, and then set the other one on top of it. But I don't know of any way to blur an image actually in Keynote. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Quick Google said, no, there's not a blur tool inside Keynote, but if you use preview, you can use the color adjustments to do some blurring effect. So if you take the image into preview. Right.
And the, the reason for that probably has to do with convolution kernels. So when a blur is a convolution kernel, it says, I'm going to look at the pixels around it, and it's much more CPU intensive to do that. Today, the chips do it so easily. I mean, if you open up Pixelmator, you'll get a good example of, or Affinity Photo, you get a really good example of, there's no cost to doing blurs at this point. So I think that may be a historical limitation, but I've wanted blurs in the past. The reason I was like, I don't think there is, because I've never been able to find one, because I want to blur something out and blur coming back in. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, what I would try to do, and I don't know how to do this, so this is just what I would try to do. If you can blur the video outside of Keynote, you can have two copies of the video, one's a blurred copy and one's the not blurred, and then bring them both into Keynote and layer them like Alex said.
You could absolutely do that. You could do it in motion and just build the slide that way. Like do what you would do. I think what David's trying to find is a way to do it without, burning it into the system. So which would make sense. Let's go to the next question. Oh, sorry, Roscoe, you can answer. I missed that one. I missed your.
No, it's okay. It's just it's a clunky fix. It's the detail adjustment under the color tab. So if you're throwing away the detail, and they say you might have to do it multiple times to get the amount of blur you want. So it's really a clunky fix.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's go to the next question.
Chris Widener from Lafayette, Indiana. Any luck getting Keynote to recognize virtual cameras?
We have not seen that. It's the only way to get it to see virtual cameras. Well, this isn't really a way to do it, but the workaround we think is going to be this. Who made the little the new NDI device? BirdDog has this little NDI device that'll have NDI and it'll show up as a webcam. So you could theoretically have something NDIing out and then appearing as a USB input to Keynote for it to go out. You probably end up with some lag. Between the two of those, you probably end up with, 8 frames or 12 frames of lag to do that. And that is one of the problems that I have, even when I'm doing a live input into Keynote, is that throughput is adding lag. So I have to think about my audio chain, to make that work, because it's going to be, I have to delay it because the audio, I'm losing, I think, like 4 frames going through Keynote. So that's another thing to think about. Next question.
James Foslin from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Is there a Keynote to motion workflow?
Boy, I wish there was. Yeah, I mean, I think that the first step that motion really needs to do is be able to do all the effects of Keynote in motion would be groundbreaking. It would just that, even if you can't import the Keynote document, but replicate all of the great things that Keynote does as behaviors in motion. That's all it has to do, is just build a bunch of new behaviors that have the exact same settings, the exact same setups and everything else. Because I've done videos where I go back to Keynote and render it out of Keynote because it was so easy to add this. I just want to go zoom, 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 zoom in a very specific way. It's way easier for me to add that in Keynote than it is in motion. And so I just do it in Keynote, export it out and send it to motion. And I feel stupid every time I do it. I'm like, this is the dumbest thing. So I think that the first step is for motion to add all the Keynote transitions. But what you really want to be able to do is mock something up in Keynote, export it to motion, and have it show up as a project. Like, here is the project, because if you had those behaviors, it would be easy because it wouldn't be keyframing, it wouldn't do anything else. It's just the behavior that's there. And if you were able to do that, I think then that would be super interesting. To be able to now you're mocking things. I've done really complex slide decks in Keynote to a point where I showed it to the client and they said, well, that's great. Well, where do we write the check? And I'm like, that was the demo. Like it'll look better when I do it in motion. But then after the first one of those, I just said, here's the bill. I put a lot of work into that Keynote document. So I think that you can do very professionally looking stuff with Keynote. And we'll try to dig more into that as we move forward. But I thought it'd be useful. Sometimes we just want to do these Q&As to just answer questions that you want to answer rather than the things we think we want to show you. Next question.
Morgan Price from Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. We're using a Keynote animation for a simple video. I suggested doing only graphics in Keynote and editing in another app. A team member wanted to put more into the Keynote, music and videos. Any recommendations on where to draw the line in Keynote?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I think it really matters what's easiest for you as a team, because you'll both be working on it together. And if everyone works well in Keynote and Keynote can do the job, that might be the right choice. If it's during a live presentation, you'll lose some control if everything's embedded into your slide deck. But if you're trying to deliver a a recording that's exported from Keynote somewhere else, then maybe it is best to build it all into one single Keynote and export it as a QuickTime video. It really depends on your use case, your audience, and who's building it.
Yeah, I almost never. So I love Keynote, as you know. I almost never put videos into it. So I will if I'm in a presentation and it makes sense because I'm animating them in and I'm going to do a short thing. But if it's a full frame video, so if it's a frame in frame video, I may put it into Keynote. If it's a full frame video, and even if I'm doing a live event, I'm going to have a separate playout system that's going to make it work, because it's really hard to start anything that's in Keynote. And it is, I oftentimes don't get every frame, like it's, so it doesn't render every frame. And so it will look smoother coming out of a playout system like a HyperDeck or QLab or Softrons on the air. Will all be better. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks.
Go ahead, Eric. Sorry, if you get really at the end, I sometimes will miss it, but go ahead, Eric.
Sorry about that. So we actually have been using Keynote, like I said, for lower thirds, and the value of having them put together in another application is that control. And sometimes it's also, you want to be able to adjust, if there's transparency, you want to be able to move things on the fly. And so if you're going to be creating a video, like I use LumaFusion, and it's a very inexpensive editor. It works on the Mac, the M1 series and above, but it also works on the iPad. So you get a lot of transition between those two. And I think that is, for us, was that flexibility of being able to kind of pick and choose where we wanted to use it, rather than having kind of everything built into one application.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing to note is that you just remember with Keynote that you can export out as Apple ProRes 444. So you can do animations for lower thirds and for graphics and everything else, and export them out with keyfill. You can't play them out as keyfill. I really wish Keynote would let you play out a keyfill. That would be really cool. But you can, and maybe with some of the new stuff that they're put into Monterey, there could be a chance for them to actually be able to send, it would be easy because the libraries are now going to support the cards. So Apple is going to start supporting the Blackmagic and AJA and other cards natively instead of using Siphon. And so with that, potentially Keynote could just push out keyfill in possibly even Motion, could push out keyfill in real time or Final Cut, anything that has 2 channels. And so we'll see if that actually happens. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, could a Keynote OSC utility that would accept OSC messages and output AppleScript commands to control Keynote be a marketable product?
I think it's a marketable product. It would just be hard to market. It's a very vertical market. And so you'd really have to know the industry to do it. I mean, it would be very useful. I just don't know how large that market would be to put that together. Next question. Oh, go ahead, Roscoe. Be careful. Try to get raised.
Sorry, I try to get there. Anyways, I put a link into somebody that's already got the scripts. You can publish them. Their Apple scripts already set up to do Keynote triggering.
That's great. Next question.
Mark Giuliani from DC. Any advice on converting Keynote to PowerPoint for those clients stuck in Windows?
John.
If you have to convert the file type, where you're going to have problems is in animations, transitions, and fonts. So make it as simple as possible. My recommendation would be build everything in Keynote except for your animations and transitions, convert it to PowerPoint, and then rebuild all the animations in PowerPoint. And I would do the same thing going from PowerPoint to Keynote as well.
And by the way, that's also a great thing for numbers, which we're not talking about today, but may talk about in the future. Numbers, the best thing to do is if you're going to you may decide you're going to put these in Google so that everyone can share the document, but don't build it in Google. Don't build it in Slides. It's super slow and painful. You can build it in Numbers is way faster and better for organizational type spreadsheets but Sheets is way better at collaboration. So build it in Numbers, export it out as an XLS, and then bring it into thing where that doesn't necessarily work as all your calculations. So if you're doing a lot of calculations, but if you're organizing things, people and schedules and things, you're not really doing a true spreadsheet. I would recommend doing that. I will say that we're not talking about Numbers today, but Numbers is another one of those kind of unknown things where a lot of people go, oh, well, I'm just going to use Excel because it's a real spreadsheet thing. And the question I always have is, what are you doing in Excel you need so much power? Because unless you're doing really, really heavy calculations, and I will say, if you're doing deep math for financials, Excel is faster and better and more fluid than the numbers. And that's like 0.001% of the people that use it. Most people are doing spreadsheets of organizational things and lists and schedules and other things like that, at least in our industry. And even budgets. A budget is a one page with simple add and subtract and multiply. And numbers is 100 times better. Like I have given people numbers documents of like what the budget's going to be. And I've got white space and I've got little things and they're all connected and big words and little words. And I'm not contained to the stupid cells and you have this beautiful thing and they're like, what did you do this in? I'm like, numbers. Like I can put all that stuff in there. And so it's also a very powerful tool to do those kinds of things. Go ahead, Mark.
So some of us are stuck in this world where half of our office is in Windows because of the products they use for architecture and engineering, like Revit and such. And it's just so frustrating to have to, go back and forth to something they can read when you like using Keynote. And I really wish Apple would just make a Keynote Lite for Windows. Yeah, just so they could open up and comment. I mean, I know it's all built around their hardware and everything, but it would just be so nice.
Yeah. One thing we have done when we had to submit something in PowerPoint is because we had to do it for a couple of reasons. We just made movies of the whole of our keynote, and then we put them all into PowerPoint as movies, and just one slide after the other in PowerPoint, and it would play out. They're like, "How did you do that animation in PowerPoint?" And I'm like, "I played a movie out from Keynote." So anyway, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, actually, that's just what I was going to say. I think to John's point, you could do the opposite, where the animations are rendered as videos first, and then you can build the slide around those animations, and that could be really useful in exporting to PowerPoint. But I try to generate the presentations in Keynote and then give them in Keynote if I can, and then I just keep them for myself for the most part.
Yeah. Next question.
From Fred Eric Eckert in Bad Herrenab, Germany. When presenting with Keynote, it would be nice to have a grid with your slides. So while presenting, you could easily jump between slides. Is there a workaround for that?
There is. You should be able to do keystrokes. And I think that it is, let me see if I can get this to work here. I don't do it very often because I practice my slides so much that I couldn't, I do have, let's see, it's not really let me see if I can try to figure this out here. I think that there are keystrokes here. So if I do, so I go into play. Let's try this. So what you can do is you can hit, let me see here, let's show this here. So this isn't perfect, but because people will see it. I don't know if you would see it in the preview, but yeah, that might work. Anyway, so this is just to show you this. If I hit Command 3, this comes up here and I can, choose which one I want, which slide I want. I don't know if that solves your problem. But then you hit it and then hit go and it does the thing. Now, what I don't have this set up for is a second monitor. I think that you can do this Command 3, and this will be in the presentation monitor. So it's not a grid, but you'll see a list of those of these here, and you can use the arrow up and down to jump to them. I believe that there is another keystroke that will, and it's pretty much command. It's command. It seems like any command. There is a way to just jump to it, and I just can't find it. Hold on. No, I don't. So there is a keystroke that does it, because what we've done in the past is we've had Stream Decks where we had all the numbers of the thing, and we tap on them, and it does what it needs to do there. The other thing that I know that there's a script, there's an Apple script that can tell you to jump to something, because the other thing that we built is I had 16 slides and I had just literally a picture of the 16 slides on a Wacom tablet. And we built this little setup where if I tapped on the Wacom tablet, it would know what not quadrant, but 16th, I don't know how to say that, in there. And it would say, if you're in that thing, then it would tell AppleScript to go to that slide. So it was a little little wonky. But I could sit there and just tap on it as a second computer. It was a different computer talking to that computer. It was very there's a lot of back and forth there to make that work. And we did that for a big presentation, and it took people and things and weeks and figuring out how to make it so that a educator could have a grid that they could just tap on to jump to the next thing that they want to talk about. And so I don't know if there's a more efficient way to do that. Maybe John has a better answer. Go ahead, John.
Yes. So here's one thing that PowerPoint's better at. In PowerPoint, it would be inserting a zoom. In Keynote, here's what I would do. Build your whole slide deck first, take a screenshot of every slide, and then create a new master slide that has a grid of all your screenshots. Then you can put a link on each of the screenshots, so you have like a little image of the slide that goes to that slide. And if you're really clever about it, you could put those thumbnails on the outside borders of your slide and use a magic move transition. And so when you click on an item, the rest would poof out of the slide. That's and it'd have a nice animation to look really good. And put an invisible button on every slide to take you back to your homepage.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, good, Mark.
Control Command G, apparently, with the number of the slide following it, is how you move around. Control Command G. Any luck?
Yeah, so it's been a while since I did that. So this is, if we're here and we hit, and I didn't try to do it while I was playing, so let's try playing it. Come open D. Oh, I don't know if it kind of worked. It just brings back up it did it, but then I have to hit return. So that comes out of there. And again, it may be different in a, it could be different when we do second, when we have a second screen. So I'd have to, I should, for the next time we do this, I'll make sure I have a second screen that I can cut to both of those screens inside of our presentations here. So we'll work on that. Next question.
Chris Taylor in Carlsbad, California. During a presentation in Keynote, do you advance slides with a mouse, spacebar, or whatever that thing is?
Go ahead, John.
If I'm in person, especially if I'm standing up, I will typically have a clicker with me. I don't have a fancy clicker. It's just a little Logitech device. And I like that because I can advance the slides from anywhere in the room. If I'm at home like I am right now, I'll typically use the spacebar because I have a mechanical keyboard with silent switches, and I can advance it without making noise.
Go ahead, John.
I usually do things from my desk in the office over Zoom, so I use the spacebar.
When I'm on stage, we talked about this before, I use a perfect cue. So this is the DSAN perfect cue, and this has a little receiver, and it will work for hundreds of feet, and it'll work every single time. This is the thing to have. They're hard to get right now. I think they're part of the chip shortage victims. So, but it's, I've got a bunch. I have the big ones and little ones and medium-sized ones that I have one of each in my house. So that, from the past. So I use these in front of people. This is the one, this comes in a little pack, and this is the one I carry around in my backpack if I need to do presentations. At my desk, I use an iPad. So I literally, I typically have an iPad next to me, and I just simply go, move along with that. The other thing that I may do is use a Stream Deck, I don't know where it is right now, but the little six key Stream Deck that has just forward, back, and a couple other little commands. And so I don't want the whole thing because I'll hit the wrong things. So I just have, the forward, the back, and some other play, stop, commands in the Stream Deck to make that work. So that's how I approach that. Go ahead, Eric.
So I do it a little different. So I use OBS to output to a stream, but I've actually been using Keynote as a telestrator. So I can switch to it with the Stream Deck, theoretically, and then I can actually draw if it, yeah, there we go. Yep. So you can say, so I'm actually projecting the Keynote and then keying out the background color.
Yep.
And then I can actually present behind it by pushing and you can see the Keynote will type out in the background. Yep. There. I can just kind of move through it.
Yeah, and you're doing that over black, right? And then just doing a Luma key.
Yeah, so I've got, you can see, I don't know if you can see, I've got an iPad on a green screen, and then I just key out the green, and then I think it's a Lumikey, and then from there, I use Reflector to AirPlay from the iPad to the Mac. And Reflector is like a $4 or $5 app, and it works really well for overlaying. And then I really like to be able to draw out, because we do like technical drawings, and I like to make myself, front and center and not have some, separate whiteboard. So I use this, and it's a little fiddly sometimes because you don't exactly know where you are in the shot, but I think you can be useful there.
Yeah, and for me, my thing is because I have Keynote going into my switcher, and then I have a separate telestrator. So for me, it's if I'm doing this, I'm cutting, and I love being able to circle stuff. Now this is a Wacom tablet, so I can really see that this is what I'm talking about. And so, but I will say that having some version of a telestrator on top of Keynote, super powerful. Like it is. I won't do a presentation that matters anywhere but my house. it's because I'm set up, I have all this stuff here, and anything that I actually want to move forward, I will never do a presentation somewhere else because I'm all set up here, and I will move my world around, or I'll just reschedule if I'm not going to be in my office because it's not worth doing otherwise. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Since we're talking about advancing slides, David Brady really put in the tip. Just punch the number of the slide you want, hit return, it'll jump there while playing. If you want slide two,
I was trying that. Maybe I wasn't hitting. Oh, you know what? I wasn't hitting return. So if we do this,
hit the number 2, hit return, it'll jump right there.
Okay,
Great tip.
I'll hit 3. Oh, hold on. Dang nabbit. So hold on. I have the wrong keyboard. Yeah. That works great. So yeah, I was just forgetting the return. I was like, I thought I've done that in the past, and I couldn't remember what it is. Yeah, and then of course, because that's a keystroke, or a series of keystrokes, you could put that into your Stream Deck, for instance, and just know what, I'm going to jump to slide 15. And one of the things to think about when you build slide decks, especially like a pitch deck, is there's a temptation with a pitch deck. This is a little bit more philosophical, but to think about this, there's a temptation with a pitch deck to put everything into it. I'm going to explain everything about this thing. I'm going to explain everything about this thing. What I do is I build a pitch deck for whatever I'm doing, for pitching an idea or a business or whatever. It's 12 slides. I will not allow myself to go over 12 slides. And so 12 slides is the pitch deck. Now I might have 40 other slides that are sitting there in that pitch deck that I know where they are. And I usually just click over to them. I'm going to use David's thing. I don't know how to get to slide 40 now, but that's a whole nother problem. But I just click to them. But the point is that I know where they are. I have a little list in front of me of this is the other ideas that I wanted to talk about. And so I have all these other things that when the person on the other side of the pitch asks a question, I go, yeah, exactly. And I jump to slide 38 that shows that, and there's nothing more impressive than saying, not only do I know what you were going to ask, but I built a slide for it. But I didn't show you. And it creates the impression of a bottomless pit of information. And if they catch me the next time, I'm going to have a slide for that. If they catch me on it the next time I do the pitch, there's going to be a slide that describes that thing. And it just so you know, when they feel like they can't ask a question that you don't have a slide for, they feel like you've thought of everything. Whether you have or not is irrelevant. But the bottom line is you've thought of all those things, but then they feel like you just showed them the surface, and you've thought about it for a long time, and you have all these other answers that you didn't bother them with, and they also just keep on asking questions. And when you don't have it, what you do is when you don't have that slide, you just start drawing. Because the telestrator is impressive too. so the thing is that, so mixing those things up can be a very formidable way to have a presentation. Go ahead, John. John Pruitt.
Oh, sorry. I was expecting someone before me.
I'm sorry. I skipped Roscoe. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I got clicked. Go ahead.
No, you didn't. Mine was to push the number and hit the return key.
Okay, yeah, John.
Okay. So you prompted me about when you brought up the iPad, it reminded me of something I used to do when I did presentations in public for local clubs and events. I don't have the little clicker like you do. I would use my iPhone. That way I could walk around and have it in my hand.
You can use your watch. You can literally you can hook up your watch, and there's the Keynote watch app that you can sit there and just tap on your watch and do it. I found it to be not as responsive as a clicker. And so I have used it in the past when I wanted to walk away, to John's point. Like, I've been at NAB and I've used my iPhone many times because I just want to walk away from my computer. I like to get off and get into the crowd and ask them, or get on the floor and be in more of a conversation mode with folks. And so being able to have it somewhere else was useful. And when I do a presentation at like NAB or something like that, I probably spent 3 days practicing that slide thing. so I don't need to see any in the slides. I know what's coming next. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asked, could a web presenter be used to bring a live video source into Keynote as a camera?
Absolutely. It's a great way to do it, and it's a great way to bring it in. The problem you'll get into as with everything else is lag. So the web presenter tends to add a couple frames, I think 3 to 4 frames of lag, and then Keynote has a little bit rendering it. So you just have to know that if you're going to use any external source, but especially a web presenter, that you're going to want to think about audio delay and how that looks if you're doing it remotely. If you're doing it in person, it doesn't matter. But if you're doing it remotely, you want to think about that. Or just don't make sure that the things that are coming in are not your... So like a lot of times I have extra cameras, but you just have to be careful of what that, where you're going to put that delay. Next question.
James Fossline from Minneapolis, Minnesota. How do you increase layout accuracy, like creating a template slide for things to snap to like lower thirds?
Go ahead, John.
What you're going to want to look for is the feature called the master slide, or in PowerPoint, slide master. You can have a layout for your slide, including placeholders for text or images, and everything will be identical when you use those.
Yeah, so let's see if I can. So you have, if you're selecting these slides, you can edit slide layouts. There is a, and I have to admit that I use the master slides occasionally, but I don't use them heavily. So then I always get into this thing where I there's a lot of me going, where did I put that? What is the edit? Isn't it? I thought I could just right click on it to edit master slide. I use the generic slides most of the time, and I just build on them. So I do occasionally change those, especially if I want to put a logo into all my slides. I'll go to the master slide to put it together. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, what I do is I just duplicate the slide, and then I use the boxes from the previous slide. I just change the content a lot of time. That way everything stays lined up, and the Apple tool, if I do need to move something, the Apple snapping tools or guiding tools are wonderful for making sure everything's lined up and ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, and the other thing that you duplicate is really good is that when you cut something out of Keynote, it will paste right on top. If you go to another slide, it will paste into exactly the same place. So a lot of times I'll cut and paste things that I want to make sure that, like a logo, for instance, is in the lower corner. I might add that at the very end and hit paste. And I just know that it'll all be there. But if I'm pasting a lot and I know that it needs to be on every slide, I will tend to go into the master slide, and I will always go, I don't remember where I put that. And then I'll sit there and do it like I'm doing it now, which is like, where did I put the edit master slide? So it's I feel like it was just here a second ago. Anyway, go ahead, John.
Yeah, just be careful. If you have a lot of slides with the same format and you move one thing on one slide, then you would have to do that with every other slide, is the weakness of duplicate. If you edit your master slide, all the slides using that master will be moved accordingly. I put a link in the chat to an article on how to edit master slides. You might not be able to edit the default master slide. You might have to make a new one and create a copy of it to be able to edit.
Yes. I will admit that I've become obsessed with it's edit slides. So basically what you want to do here is, let me show you this. I now I remember where it is. So if we go in here and you go over to this slide and you right click on it and you say edit slide layouts is what you're looking for. Now, these are all the slide layouts that you have here for this theme. So if I move this over like this, for instance, if I move this here, every time that slide is created and any slide that's based on it will be changed. So if I hit done, now if I create a new slide, you'll see that this is an option that's there. That's the option that you have there. So that is it's edit slide layouts. You have to right click on or control click on the slide itself in the panel there to get that to work. But that's where you edit the slides, and then you can make things that are specific to what you want to do. Next question.
And next question from Douglas Carmichael. What use cases could a Keynote OSC utility be most beneficial for?
I'd be tying in, for me, it'd be tying in Isadora. So having something that you could have a bunch of things automated and you have a whole bunch of other things that are there, and building a custom interface so that you could sit there and just tap on things would be super powerful. And when you brought up the Keynote OSC thing, I was thinking, oh, I got to think about that a little bit, of what that could mean, because I could build something that is, again, building a custom interface that says I'm going to have something open in front of me, maybe an iPad or maybe a whatever it is, and I'm tapping on things that I want to do. I'm going to play this. I'm going to play this video. Now I'm going to do this. And if it could just jump to certain slides or certain things and do the thing that it needs to do, that would be a very powerful way to build even more complex ways of doing presentations. And I will say that, again, why we're going to focus fairly often on Keynote specifically and slides. And I'm really glad to have so many people here that are experts in slides. Slide decks is, this is a superpower. If you're a teacher, a superpower. If you're presenting, superpower, because almost everybody is bad at it. Mark Andreessen said that 90% of people aren't very good at what they do. There's only the top 10%. In Keynote or in presentations, I would say it's 99.999% of the people are very bad at what they do. When it comes to it, they've gotten into bad habits. They've learned from the wrong people. They just don't think about it that much. I raised $1 million on one slide deck, for the school that we built in Africa, and it was because I came after someone who built their presentation in Excel. I'm sorry, but they built it in Excel. It was the most impressive Excel document I've ever seen, but it was horrible. And then I came later and I built a very impressive deck. And the only person people were talking to after the thing was me. And so the thing is that this is being able to communicate your ideas effectively and impressively should not be underspoken. It doesn't matter how technical. The person before me had multiple PhDs and had done many impressive things and everything else. And I don't have a degree in anything. I don't have any piece of paper that tells you that I know what I'm talking about. And so, but what I do know how to do is use Keynote. And so you should really never underestimate the power of being able to put together a great presentation. And this is the best tool in the world to do it in. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, typically you can tell a PowerPoint presentation because it has 1,000 words on it. And so in our nonprofit, I've been working with them on building a slide kind of pitch deck. 6 words. That's their limit. They cannot put more than 6 words on a slide. They can have all the image framing, those kind of things, but 6 words is it. And I think that's really critical in communicating is don't put a lot of words on it. You be the words. You be the guide of that presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. And someone says, well, how do I leave something behind? I'm like, there's this app called Pages. That's what you use to build things with lots of words. You make pages of things, and there are people that want slide decks, and sometimes I have 2 slide decks, the presentation deck and the leave behind deck, because there are some companies that, there's a lot of big companies that they'll say that everything in the company is driven by decks and demos. That's decks and demos are what everything, and that would be most of FANG, except for Amazon. So most of FANG runs on decks and demos. If you have something impressive to show people, or if you have a great deck, and they have teams, when they want to move an idea, there are teams in the companies, and one specifically, every division has their own team that all they do is decks. And that's not for external use. It's just to move the idea internally from one place to the other. And I know that because I submit my raw decks, and then they get redone. And I'm good at it. They're way better than I am, and they make it look much prettier than mine. And no matter how hard I work at it, I'm always trying to, I rarely see the deck out on the other end of it because I'm not read into it, but I send the raw, every once in a while I see a glimpse of it and I'm like, oh, so much better than what I did. Anyway, next question.
Next question coming in, John Pewitt from Huntersville, North Carolina. Any tips for exporting a PowerPoint template into Keynote?
Oh, I don't know about a template. I guess what I would do is every slide and then use it to define how I would approach it without thinking through this is that I would make a slide out of every thing in the template. I would open that and I would save that out, open it in Keynote, and then turn each one of those into one of the template slides is probably how I'd approach it. Go ahead, Roscoe.
The amount of time you have, you may not have time to translate all your fonts, and fonts always look funky between PowerPoint and Keynote. So I would pick one of the 5 I put in there, which are good presentation fonts that are available on both platforms.
I just want to say one thing about fonts. Never, ever, ever use serif fonts in your Keynote, in your presentation, please, for the children. Never. It's not a presentation font. Serif fonts are for the New York Times, Vanity Fair, that kind of thing, old things. so anyway, go ahead, John.
Grotesque fonts only. I will remember that. I learned a new term this week, so which is grotesque fonts or sans serif. Yeah. Our slide deck that's a template really isn't a template. It's just a huge PowerPoint deck that has every single type of slide in it. And so I just do a save as. So if I open that up, that should work. I'm not really worried about fonts so much because the fonts are standard on our Macs and Windows, so it should work just as well in either one.
I use a lot of the Google fonts because they are free and everybody can use them, and they're otherwise I'm matching whatever. But a lot of the Google fonts are very much like this one is very much like that one. Like this one is very much like that one, and I find that they work fairly well. The kerning is in the Google fonts isn't as good. That's the only issue that I really have with it.
I'm just trying to keep in our corporate standard. That's all.
Yeah. No, I'm saying for general, but when you're in a corporate standard, you want to stay in the fonts that they give you. Absolutely. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asked the question, could the subscription lock-in aspect of Microsoft 365 be a strong argument to switch to Keynote numbers pages from PowerPoint, Excel, Word?
Good, John.
I'm going to answer this from a corporate point of view, and that is 90% of the people, 95% of the people in corporations are going to be using Windows devices. So they're going to be stuck with PowerPoint, Word, Excel, because Keynote pages and numbers are not available. That said, use what your platform's native in if you can. I really think that I think pages and numbers are really good for that platform, but it's not more of a lock-in thing because at least from a corporation point of view, it's more or less free because you're going to be paying for the licenses anyway.
Next question.
And from Craig McFarlane in Boston, what are the shortcomings of Keynote on the web for team members on Windows?
Good, John.
I think you might be able to use that as a viewer. I do not know if every animation and transition works the same when presenting from the web. A few years ago, they did not. So I have not gone back to going to the web in 3 years because when I went, there was half the features that were done poorly.
I don't use the web version at all. so like I present over this medium. I would recommend against it. Keynote's great. I don't think that the web stuff, the sharing stuff, I think all of that stuff I don't even know. And here's the worst part. It's such a hard problem. I don't even know how to fix it. Like, I don't know how to tell them what to do because I don't even know. It's a very hard problem. So when we complain about it and we say, don't use it, it's not really an indictment of the team that works on Keynote. It's really just, this is a really hard problem they haven't figured out, and it's because it is it's just permissions, handoff, how do you sync it? All these things are tricky little things, especially when people aren't connected all the time. It's easy for Google Slides to do it because Google Slides is in the cloud. So you're operating on the same document. When you have two home documents and you're working on it, whose takes precedent and how does it work? And how do you keep it from, the old one overriding the new one? And these are hard problems to figure out, especially if you have multi-tenancy of like 5 or 6 people working on something. So in all fairness, that these are hard problems to solve. And I don't ask them to solve those anymore. I don't make any requests against that. I just know it doesn't work. Go ahead, Roscoe.
I think one shortcoming is I think you have to sign into your iCloud account, even from a PC, in order to access it on the web. So I think that could be a pain.
The one thing I will say is the Keynote Live works really well. So Keynote Live, being able to open it somewhere else is very powerful. Next question.
And from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana, he asked, what about the web version of Keynote for Windows users? Bad idea?
Yes, bad idea. We just talked about that. Yeah, so just another question for the same thing, and the answer is bad idea. Next question.
And it's from David Brady in New York, New York. How easy is it to build out Keynote templates for enforcing branding, looks, colors, and fonts? See my chat comment from 11/11/32 for a little more info.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, if it's something you're going to use all the time, I'd recommend hiring someone who's a professional to build the one you want, and it will pay off over time.
And if you don't, you can just basically, you can set those all up. You can create all those slides and then save out a theme. So you basically save the theme out. So you build the slide deck, you put all the stuff in that you want for all those slides, and then say save as theme. And then that's a theme that you can give to other folks. A lot of times, the easiest way to do it is just give them a deck with all the things in it. But that's you can decide how you do that. But I will say that it really does help to send people, like definitely if we're doing a group of presentations for folks, we want to send something out that is saying at least use this theme, or we'll make some designs to it. I will say that when people send me themes, I'm usually very happy with them, because there's a couple of themes that I've gotten over the past couple of years that I use all the time, because somebody spent a lot of money. It doesn't look like a theme in Keynote, and it looks great. Next question.
Harshid from Daytona Beach, Florida. What brand is that mechanical keyboard? Thank you.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, it's some cheap Chinese knockoff. The key is that it's using Cherry MX Black switches.
Nice. Next question.
Next question, Elliot Robinson from Las Vegas. Are there fonts that distinguish between the number 0, Arabic, and the letter 0, or O, Latin?
I think most fonts do. I mean, I think that most fonts will have the 0 will be thinner than the O, typically. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Oh, yeah, exactly that most of the time. But you kind of have to learn which is which. It's not always obvious. I always appreciate the fonts, if I'm doing accounting, that put the slash through the 0.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And things that I'm hoping to see someday with this, in addition to USDZ inside of Keynote, which we will definitely cover a lot, is one of the things that I'm really hoping to see is the 3D fonts that we see in Motion being put in. Because I do, sometimes when I want to have a lot of impact, I will go and build a 3D font in Motion, render it out with an alpha channel, and drop it into Keynote, and it looks so good. Like it's just like a big 3D, thing sitting in there. So I'm hoping that someday we'll get the 3D engines to work on that. All right. It's fantastic. Good, really good panel talking about this. Hopefully when we do keynotes, you guys will all show up again. It's really, really good. We may do a group of these for a little while in Keynote, just because I think that especially as we're trying to figure out if people show up with that many questions every single time, we're going to keep talking about Keynote. We'll probably do some demos. And so for especially the folks in this panel, or if you're not in this panel and you're interested in doing little demos of how you're doing cool things, doesn't have to be an hour. Think about one tip, one tip or trick that you might want to show people with Keynote. We're going to do it because I think that it's, again, I really been thinking about it over the last couple of weeks and how powerful it is to move ideas, to have tools that help move ideas forward. And we kind of, death by PowerPoint is kind of poisoned the whole idea. And it's just because it's not done well. And so, we're going to do it because we know how to do Keynote, and because I think it's the best solution for it. We're going to keep talking about Keynote. We may do it weeks in a row. It's just a matter of, we're probably going to do a lot of Keynote on these education hours, unless you suggest other education things where who they are. I'm happy to put other things in, but I've decided my default of, I don't have something scheduled for education is going to be Keynote. So when you see Keynote, so if you have other things from an education perspective or from a presentation perspective, this is education technology. So the next conversation we're about to have is, it can be education technology, but it's oftentimes just general discussion about education. But if you're interested in those things, suggestions, especially if you know someone or if you can talk about something that you want to talk about, we've had a couple people here present some incredible tools here, of how they use things. And it can be education from K through 12, secondary, as well as professional. Just think about those things and how they work, and we'll talk through them. So thank you to the panel. Really appreciate your time. And thanks to the producers for asking all the great questions. When we got into we had 2 questions at the top of the hour, and I was like, oh, I don't know if this was a good idea. So, but it turned out to be great questions, and so we'll dig more into this as we go. And now what we're going to do is bring our educators in. We're going to say goodbye to our YouTube audience. Yeah, it's great seeing you. Goodbye. Hopefully it's gone now. I'm going to turn off the encoder. And so we're going to stop our there we go. Oh, right. In between this, we can still whisper to Mitchell. Hi, Mitchell. He loves it. He loves this part of the show.
Mitchell doesn't whisper.
He doesn't. He doesn't like that. Makes him sad.
He was never invited to a sleepover.
I know. It's very, very hard. All right. Okay. Now we're gonna stop now. And I'm stopping the encoder. And so now we're going to go back to our education stuff. So we're going to bring in our educators and do mic checks. Who is doing our Q questions? Do we have Tony doing that, or who's